without that. If you can't hear me yell, I'll use this machine, but normally my voice is audible. Thank you very much for inviting me. It's a great honour and privilege to be in this part of the world. When I was invited by Jack over there, I accepted with alacrity. I hope I wasn't quite as overeager as one of my colleagues who languished unnoticed on the back benches of the House of Commons for 30 years before he finally received an invitation from the BBC to take part in a television programme. And the letter said there'd be a fee of £50. And he wrote back saying he'd be delighted to take part and enclosed a cheque for £50. I promise not to reveal how much I've had to pay for the privilege of coming and speaking to you tonight. I was going around the tables finding what you'd like me to talk about, and some of the people said, oh, the B word, I couldn't work out quite what they were talking about. Others wanted to know what it's like being a member of the House of Lords. And since I've only been there a few months, I would just tell you in a few sentences what it's like. To my sadness, only when the first day when you're introduced is the only time when you actually get to wear the ermine, the red robes and the ermine things. My wife said it's not really ermine, it's rabbit, but you borrow it for the occasion. And it feels very splendid. But you don't ever wear it again, which is rather sad. Though there is a story that Lord Hailsham, when he was introduced to the House of Lords, still wearing his robes, went out of the House of Lords and out towards the central lobby, which was full of tourists. And he saw the other side of the lobby was Neil Kinnock, whom he wanted to have a word with. So he shouted across, "Neil!" At which point 150 tourists fell to their knees. And I've always been hoping that if I wore my robes too, it would have the same ingratiating effect. It hasn't. You also mentioned about bastards. Now, it is quite true that I was, I think, the leading bastard. At the time, I was quite proud of it. My mother was rather upset. My father was already dead. He'd have been even more upset. But subsequently, and I continued to get on very well with John Major. It was some phrase that slipped out when he didn't realise the microphone was on after the interview. Better to have those bastards inside the tent leaving themselves out rather than outside the tent leaving themselves inwards. That was quite his words put together. Gist. Anyway, subsequently, there was a problem with a member of Parliament, a member for Welwyn and Hatfield, I forget his name temporarily. He had been also caught on tape talking to a group of constituents about his Labour opponent, whom he described as an unmarried mother with 5 little bastards. And this had caused great embarrassment. It was coming up to the general election. And after Cabinet one day, I had to stay behind and talk to John Major because we were doing a joint press conference about something. And while we were preparing for it, in came an official with a piece of paper and gave it to John Major, who read it and said, "Oh, that's good news. You better see this, Peter, because at last we persuaded the member for Welwyn Hatfield to apologise for calling his opponent an unmarried mother with 5 little bastards." I just turned to him and said, "Oh, Prime Minister, I didn't realise that word was insulting." And it's the only time I've seen John Major lost for words, when he suddenly remembered what he'd done to me. However, now, move on to things. Others were talking about the studying for politics, and I said to someone, if you're going to study politics, you don't need to go to university. All you need to do is watch that wonderful series, Yes, Minister. You remember it. Lots of people used to ask me, does that accurately describe the relationship between ministers and civil servants? And we used to reply, you think it's a comedy, we know it's a documentary. But it's only a documentary if you have a weak minister who's got no clear agenda, no clear convictions, and gets into office and spends his whole time trying to win a good headline tomorrow or get out of a bad headline the day before, and is all over the place. Now, in those circumstances, the civil service takes over and substitutes their own agenda for the lack of agenda from their minister. And a very good thing too. It's better to have consistent government than completely wayward government. On the other hand, if a minister comes in and says, this is my agenda, this is what I want to do, you've got to do it, there will be a period of testing. Well, they try and work out whether you really mean it. Obviously, they're civil servants, so they won't want to change anything, if possible. And certainly don't want to change away from the sort of departmental view of how things ought to be done. Nonetheless, if you insist, and I found this when I was made Secretary of State for Social Security, and I was a Treasury Minister, and they were all terrified I was going to, trample on the face of the poor and do other wicked things. So they were terribly in favour of me, and I did want to bring the budget under control. So there was some resistance. But after a while, when they realised that I had a clear agenda, that that's what we were going to do, they were wonderful. And they swung round and instead of trying to resist everything, helped me do it in the best possible way. We had 5 years of what I think were successful reforms, which they hadn't originally wanted but delivered very well. Now I tell you all that because it gives you some idea behind what's happening at present. And the sad truth is, we are seeing the civil service effectively take over the government of this country.
Yeah.
Because we are in the very odd position, never had before, where the people have directed that a certain policy be followed, but we have a parliament which the majority of whose MPs voted in the other direction, and even within the cabinet and the government, the majority of MPs voted in the other direction. And you are not getting clear direction to the civil service. And yet they're being asked to do something which is the most radical thing that's had to be done since we joined the European community back in 1973, or perhaps even since the Second World War. And the civil servants doesn't do radical things willingly. They have to be driven to do it, and they're not being driven. And instead they've taken over the agenda themselves. And their agenda, I'm absolutely convinced, has from the very beginning been to change as little as possible, to give us, if possible, Brexit in name only, remaining in the common, in the customs union, remaining in the single market, remaining subject where, in large areas, to the European Court, and so on. And they were quite happy if indeed people found that so unappetizing that we were still in everything, but we lost our vote, we lost our voice, we lost our veto. So instead of taking back control, we lost control. They were quite happy if people then will think, oh, well, why not stay in after all? So that's been the game plan of the civil service from day one. But they faced a problem. That Mrs. May had made a very clear speech at Lancaster House saying we were going to leave the customs union, we were going to leave the single market, we were going to cease to be under the control of the European Court. And then we had a general election, and those things all appeared in our manifesto, as did the phrase, no deal is better than a bad deal.
Yeah.
And so the civil service has since then been trying to get round this. But actually, there's only one arrangement between ourselves and Europe which is compatible with those election pledges, and that would be a free trade deal. A simple free trade deal where we continue to trade, zero tariffs on their goods entering, and they have zero tariffs on ours entering. But we're free to have trade deals with the rest of the world. You are with a free trade area, but you're not in a customs union. Where we're free to have our own laws as far as products and regulation and so on, which you are in a free trade area, but you're not if you're in the single market. It's not just me who noticed that that was the only solution compatible with our manifesto. President Tusk, back in March of 7th of March last year, and then again in the 4th of October, said, we are prepared to offer Britain a free trade area, like we have just negotiated with Canada, only more so with added cooperation on education, on culture, on innovation, scientific research and so on, and obviously defence and security. We're prepared to offer that. But it was turned down. It was rejected. Indeed, I don't think they even bothered to send a letter rejecting it. It was simply ignored. And since then, they've ploughed on in the direction of a customs union and remaining in the single market. And that's why, when the EU raised the issue of the Irish border, everybody thinks, gosh, that was a brilliant trap of theirs. It wasn't a trap. I'm afraid it was willingly seized upon by elements in the government, particularly in the Treasury, but also Ollie Robbins and co, because they said that's an excuse to remain in the customs union, the single market. Because there are only two ways to solve the Irish border issue. I think two ways to avoid having infrastructure on the border and checks at the border. One is that you have the same laws, the same tariffs, either side of the border, or that you find administrative ways of dealing with it which don't involve infrastructure in the border and checks at the border. The latter is quite possible. It's how we do it at present. We have different rates of duty on alcohol, on red diesel, on cigarettes and things north of the border from what's south. We have different rate of VAT north of the border and south. If you export something from north of the border to the south, it's zero rated, whereas if you export, as it were, from Ireland to the rest of the UK, it just pays an ordinary VAT. So there are huge differences at the border. We deal with all of them without border posts. People have to fill in any information they have to send to the Inland Revenue by, the wonderful thing, new technology, it's called the internet. They send their tax returns in and that's how it's done, and there are no checks on the border. There are cooperation between the two sides. If we got wind of someone smuggling cigarettes or drugs or anything else, we cooperate with the other side and we sort it out. So it can be done. But instead, the government often said, oh right, yes, of course, we'll have to solve the border by signing up to what's become this Irish protocol. This commitment to have the same tariffs north of the border as we have south, the same laws north of the border as we have south, and that either means that we have to have those tariffs and laws over the whole United Kingdom, which means the whole of the United Kingdom remaining in the customs union, and the whole of the United Kingdom remaining subject to single market laws, or we'd have to hive off Northern Ireland effectively to have the same laws and tariffs as Southern Ireland and have checks and border controls for things going from Great Britain to Northern Ireland and vice versa. The latter was unacceptable to the DUP, and so effectively we've gone to the whole of the United Kingdom being a customs union and the single market. I don't know why this is never pointed out, but that's what it says in the document, and it says in the associated political agreement that any future agreement will be based on that. So the only way out of the Irish Protocol is effectively to continue with a customs union and single market laws. So that's the position we're in. And that's why when Parliament discovered that this commitment was to be perpetual, that we couldn't actually leave the agreement, it wasn't just a temporary thing while we were working out something better, but we could only leave it with the permission of the European Union, that Parliament, by the largest majority the government's ever been defeated by, defeated the proposal. But then when it came back again, Mrs May very sensibly backed an amendment put down by Mr Brady, the head of the 1922, chairman of the 1922 committee, saying that the protocol had got to be replaced, and then we'd support the rest of it. There are other things in it that are objectionable, like paying £39 billion for nothing in particular, but still. But we'd swallow all that if we at least weren't binding ourselves perpetually into something which we didn't want, and which would prevent us having trade deals or with the rest of the world, or altering our own laws to make them more competitive and user-friendly. So that was passed, with Conservatives uniting behind it, the DUP supporting it, a few Labour people supporting it. It was passed, and we all hoped that was going to solve it. She would go back and say, look, we just got to change this thing. And at the same time, unity broke out in the Conservative Party. A group of people from the European Research Group and a group of people from the other wing of the party, Nicky Morgan and Damien Green and so on, got together and said, we've just got to stop disagreeing. The party has got to unite. And they came up with a Malthouse compromise, which said that we would have to replace the protocol and we would have to deal with the border by administrative processes. If in return the EU said, well, that could take time and we needed a longer transition period and had to pay them even more money during that period, then okay, we'd do that. And if they wouldn't agree, then we would leave without a deal, but offering them the opportunity to continue trading on free trade terms, zero tariffs each way, which, as long as both sides agree, you can do that in the twinkling of an eye, and that's compatible with World Trade Organization rules. So that was the Malthouse Compromise, and it involves a lot of compromise by both sides of the party, but they came together. Prime Minister said, okay, I'll take that seriously. A working party was set up, and Nicky Morgan and Damien Green and I think it's Owen Patterson and Ian Duncan Smith and some customs experts, a Dutch customs expert, we've got to know Hans Meissen and so on, all started discussing this with the civil service, officially in number 10, day after day. The civil service explained why it couldn't be done, and our people came back and said, I hope we've looked into that. We've got our customs experts here, it can be done. But it's been quite clear, the civil service didn't want it, and it's never been put to the European Union, which is why they haven't accepted it, and which is why we're still in this impasse, that nothing really has changed from the original agreement which laid it down. On Tuesday, is it Tuesday anyway, the 12th, we will see that agreement put back with possibly some fig leaf from Geoffrey Cox, if he's managed to negotiate some indication that maybe we'll be able to get out of this binding commitment. If he's found a good way, then it'll go through, I suspect. But it looks as if he won't. It's been labelled Cox's codpiece. I think it's probably likely to be Cox's fig leaf, and it won't be a substantial package, in which case probably Parliament will again defeat the withdrawal agreement. The next day we will then have a vote on whether or not we should leave with no agreement. And I fear Parliament will reject that. In which case the day after we'll have another vote on whether the Prime Minister should be told by Parliament to go and negotiate an extension of Article 50 beyond the 29th of March. Now, that will be difficult for the Prime Minister. She has on 108 occasions said we're definitely going to leave on the 29th of March.
Yeah.
And I find going around the country, whether I'm talking to people who voted Remain or people who voted Leave, unless they're very extreme, they want to get out. They want to finish the process and end the uncertainty. And if we did just leave, it's been demonised as, you know, a no-deal Brexit. Say people, shock, horror, it will be a disaster, it will be a catastrophe. I'm trying to get the BBC to challenge anyone who says that. In what way will it be a disaster and a catastrophe? Now, 2 years ago, when people thought about that, there were lots of things to be worried about. There were reasons to believe that no planes would be able to land in Europe or take off from Europe. And worse than that, we wouldn't even be able to fly to the United States because our agreement with the United States was made through the European Union. So that was a frightening thing. And it was a danger that our lorries would not be able to drive in Europe because there weren't enough licenses to go around. So that was a frightening thing. There was a danger that we wouldn't be able to export Airbus wings or food or whatever because they wouldn't get safety certificates from Europe. So that was a frightening thing. All those things have been sorted out. The European Union has itself come forward and said, we will let your planes fly over Europe, land in Europe, return from Europe, as long as you let our planes fly over Britain, land in Britain, and take over from Britain. We said, yes, we will. So that's solved that. As far as the hauliers' license is concerned, they realise they have more lorries coming to us than we are going to them. And so they've said they'll create extra licenses within the EU up to the end of the year, and then after that there's a wider organisation covering 48 countries which annually gives more licenses, and they will work with us to ensure there are enough licenses for all our lorries to go over all 48 countries if they want to. So that's been sorted out. As far as safety certificates for Airbus, the EU was never going to stop us exporting Airbus wings to be attached to the body of Airbuses in Toulouse. Because without wings, they would not be able to fly. And the Europeans are not stupid, they realise that airplanes need wings, and so they've extended the validity of their certificates, and they will be able to continue. So all these things have been sorted. Then there was the worry about what would happen at Dover. If there was congestion at Dover, if we had to stop every lorry coming in and check pieces of paper and so on. Well, HMRC have been quite clear about this. Nobody requires bits of paper when they come into a British port. It's all done beforehand. You send an electronic declaration. And they would not have any more checks on the lorries coming in Dover after the 29th of March than they do before. Why is that? Because they only stop lorries to look at them if they have some reason to suppose, on the basis of intelligence or the document that's been filed with the computer in Manchester. Actually, that's where all the checks on customs declarations are made. And a complex thing will occasionally say, dodgy person there, have a look inside. So about 1% of consignments get checked. And they won't check anymore because they only check if they have reason to suppose that the consignment will be attempting to smuggle cigarettes, most common, alcohol, drugs, or illegal immigrants. And there will be no change after March 30th, the number of people trying to smuggle alcohol, cigarettes, drugs, or illegal immigrants. So there's no reason to have any more checks afterwards. I can't get the BBC to report this either. I've been arguing half this morning with the Today programme trying to get them to. And they said I'd have 30 seconds, but I couldn't cover that. Anyway, so it's all sorted out. And on top of that, the HMRC have now come up with something called transitional simplified procedures to speed up the process and ensure things can go straight through. Therefore, people are worried about what if there's blockages at Calais? And that means that they can't unload the ferries, and therefore the ferries can't return, and therefore there would be blockages at Dover then, because they couldn't load on the ferries to get out of Dover. And we've had problems like that before. We've had to invoke Operation Stack, stacking up lorries on the M20 on 211 occasions in the last 20 years. And in 2015 there were 23 consecutive days when there were 7,000 lorries stacked up and it was taking 35 hours to get across the channel. I don't notice that the British economy came to a grinding halt. It was undoubtedly a bad thing, particularly for me, since I have a house in France. I have to go back and forth a lot, and I had to go through all sorts of back routes of Kent to get there. But it's something we want to avoid. But it's not going to happen because the Calais authorities have also been taking measures to ensure the smooth flow of lorries through Calais, because, as they're perfectly frank, they are desperately afraid of losing business to Zeebrugge, Rotterdam and Amsterdam, which are far better organised to handle a trade. And they've said it will be economic suicide for them to delay trade going through Calais, and they're building 4 extra lorry lanes, they're building an extra border inspection post for animals and so on at Calais, or just outside Calais to avoid congestion at Calais. They're installing a scanner so that it can scan the trains going through the tunnel at 30 kilometres an hour. There aren't going to be any problems that side of the channel either. It'll all probably be much like the Millennium Bug was. I remember Tony Blair saying 100 days before the end of the millennium that he was terrified that planes would drop out of the sky, lifts would drop down their shafts, the banking system would collapse because computers would all go rogue. As a result, no one will be paid, there will be civil unrest, and he was prepared to call out the army to quell civil unrest. He was expecting to occur on the 1st of January 2000 odd. Nothing happened. Nothing much will happen if we leave on the 29th of March, except there'll be a lot of disappointed people who were relying on problems to persuade us to remain in the European Union. But sadly, Parliament hasn't come to that yet. Anyway, enough from me. We are therefore between a rock and a hard place. The civil service, I'm afraid, because of lack of clear guidance from the government, have put us in a very, very difficult position. Parliament may well, at the end of the day, after all these 3 votes have been taken, the Prime Minister may have to bring back again this deal, and then we'll be faced with a choice. Do we accept an unacceptable deal with no change, or do we prolong our membership of the European Union by extending Article 50, in which case we may never leave, or have to have a referendum on terms laid down by our partners in Europe and make it a condition. And I think that's all very worrying. I don't know what the outcome's going to be, but you are living through possibly the most dramatic period of our peacetime history, when we're either effectively facing a coup d'etat by the civil service, or we reassert parliamentary control, take our responsibility in our own hands, and then start using the powers we've got back to make this country a better, more prosperous country, with laws in accord with what its people want, with tariffs that support our industry, or we abolish them. And we have at the moment lots of high tariffs which are protecting European industry of things we don't even produce. We could get far cheaper than the rest of the world. So lots of opportunities if we leave. And if we leave with no deal, we also keep £39 billion. And I don't know about you, but that seems to be quite a lot of money. So I look forward to your questions.